Thank you so much for joining us today for the FASEB DataWorks grant budgeting for data management sharing, practical advice for researchers. We're thrilled to have you all here, and I have a little bit of housekeeping to go over about DataWorks before we get started. But I'm thrilled that we're joined by this panel. I'm excited about this session, and we'll get moving. Okay, so first of all, FASEB DataWorks, for those of you who are not familiar with us, is that we're a program of FASEB that brings biological and biomedical research communities together. And our mission is to help advance health through data sharing and reuse. And we do this by providing things like this salon, different kinds of resources that support best practices in data management and reuse to help researchers in this arena. Some of the resources that DataWorks provides is we do monthly salons. We do have a whole set of how-to guides. We provide blogs. We have a brand new how-to video on budgeting, which we'll put as soon as it's posted, we will send it to all of you and you can be one of the first to see it. And then we have a couple of years of really great salon recordings. The QR here would take you to all of these things. And I just wanted to bring to your attention that the next salon is October 8th at 1 p.m. Eastern time. And it's about the prize that I'm going to tell you about in just a second, but it's generalist repositories in our 2024 DataWorks prize, which is another thing that we do every single year to support the community. And this is a joint effort between the NIH, FASEB, and also this year, the NIH Generalist Repository Ecosystem called GRAY. And this prize this year is for people who would like to put together teams and use data sets from the generalist repositories, and they can use some of their own data sets too, but one of the requirements is they must use for a secondary project. So it's to encourage reuse of data and to generate novel scientific findings and create case studies for the broader research community. So it's something that all you researchers on this call might be interested in. And here's the URL down here, herox.com/dataworks. There is a $500,000 purse, and the first 10 people will get selected on phase 1, will receive $25,000 each to continue with their project. So the first phase is just telling us what you want to do and what repositories you plan on using. The second phase is being judged for the grand prize, which is $100,000, and there'll be 2 $75,000 Distinguished Achievements Awards. So this is something you may be interested in. Submit your proposal by the end of October and head on over to DataWorks. HeroX is the name of the platform. Okay, so with that, I will get started with our webinar salon. And today, I'm happy that we have these great presenters. First of all, I will say Michelle Bull, who originally was scheduled to be part of this salon, was not able to make it this morning, and Kristen has jumped in to help us. And Kristen is the deputy director of the same department. So thank you, Kristen. So our first speaker today will be Ellen Wan, and Ellen is also with the NIH. She's a team lead of the Office of Science Policy and Scientific Data Sharing Policy Division. Kristen is the deputy director of the National Institute of Health's Office of Policy for Extramural Research Administration. That's a mouthful. In the Office of Extramural, you all have very long titles, Extramural Research. And John is Data Management Project Manager at Stanford University, Office of Senior Associate Dean of Research, Stanford Medicine. Okay, so Ellen's going to give us a kind of top-level perspective of the NIH policies. Kristen's going to get a little more into the weeds about the how-tos, and then John's going to give us some perspective from the university and institutional research, the research department, the Office of Senior Associate Dean of Research Department, and also has experience as a data librarian, so in the trenches with the PIs. So I want to thank you all for being here. And with that, I will stop sharing and then let Ellen share. So let me go over to my stop share button. There you go.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much for the invitation. Hi, I'm Ellen Wan, and I'm going to be providing a brief overview of the NIH data management and sharing policy, and with a focus on budgeting for data management and sharing. First, I would like to take a step back and provide a little bit of background on this policy, and particularly why NIH is interested in data sharing. We see data sharing as critical for advancing rigorous and reproducible research and promoting public trust in research. Data sharing is important for enabling the validation of research results and making high value and hard to generate data sets accessible to the public. We also see data sharing as something that's important for accelerating new directions in research and increasing opportunities for citation and collaboration amongst researchers. In terms of promoting public trust in research, data sharing is important for fostering transparency and accountability and demonstrating good stewardship over taxpayer funds. One area that I won't talk as much about today, but data sharing is also critical for maximizing research participants' contributions to research and supporting appropriate protections of research participants and their data. NIH is not new to data sharing, however, and has a long history of having data sharing policies. We have a wide variety of policies, some that are more applicable to the local level of particular institutes and centers or particular programs, specific data types. But I'm going to be discussing a few different NIH-wide data sharing policies that led to the 2023 NIH data management and sharing policy. And the first was in 2003, and the NIH data sharing policy from 2003 expected that any researchers that were budgeting for more than $500,000 of funding, that those researchers would submit alongside their application a data sharing plan. And this was applicable to both extramural and intramural research. And that's something that this policy is being actually replaced by the 2023 policy that we're referring to today. Then another step forward was in 2007 when with the genome-wide association studies policy that was later expanded upon to the genomic data sharing policy in 2014. The genomic data sharing policy continues to be in effect to this day and applies to large-scale human and non-human genomic data. One of the expectations of this policy is that such data be shared through publicly available data repositories. Specifically, one of note is dbGaP that NIH funds. This policy also has a number of other expectations. Another policy that's important to think of in terms of history is the 2016 dissemination of NIH-funded clinical trial information policy, and that's a policy that's complementary to Part 11 regulations, and it expects that any investigators that are conducting NIH-funded clinical trials, that they register their clinical trials in clinicaltrials.gov and submit summary results there as well. Despite this really long history of data sharing, recent literature shows that there's still a lot of work to be done, and literature shows that rarely is data actually accessible, the data that's underlying peer-reviewed publications. So this is just a few papers that have been published in the last few years, and they show that as little as 2% of data underlying peer-reviewed publications are actually available, and as much as 40%. Clearly, this is something that's an impetus for this policy, and still a lot of work to be done in terms of data sharing. We do know, though, that the public really cares about data being available. So this is an example of a Pew Research survey from 2019 that asked US adults what would make them trust scientific research findings. And the number one factor that was listed was if the data is openly available to the public. So again, an impetus for the 2023 new policy. I will say that this policy should not be a surprise, as it was an iterative policy development process that occurred over almost 10 years and involved consistent community engagement. So we first went out with a request for information in 2016, again in 2018, and then published a draft policy in 2019. And that draft policy received over 200 public comments on it. And those public engagements, in addition to a formal tribal consultation and input from the Secretary's Advisory Committee for Human Research Protections, as well as other federal agencies, those all shaped the final policy that was released in 2020. And then NIH allowed for almost more than 2-year implementation period until the policy went into effect in 2023. That implementation period allowed for more information to be released in terms of how the policy would be implemented, and for a greater degree of comfort with policy's expectations. Then in April of 2023, it should be noted that OSCP confirmed that this policy does meet the expectations in terms of data sharing from the 2022 Nelson memo from the Office of Science and Technology Policy. So that indicates that this policy will continue and not be changed as to meet those expectations going forward. A few core tenets of this policy is that the data sharing policy, a data management and sharing policy, requires two basic expectations. The first is the submission of a data management and sharing plan for all NIH-funded research, regardless of budget. And the second is compliance with that plan as it is approved by the NIH institutes and centers. The data management and sharing plan indicated in the policy is to be a place where researchers describe how they plan to manage and share their data, including where they plan to manage and share their data through established repositories, highly emphasizes established repositories, and when. And the policy indicates that NIH staff will be doing the assessment of plans, and that is in part to increase the consistency in plan assessment across NIH funded research. The policy also indicates that non-compliance may affect future funding. As I noted before, the policy went into effect in January of 2023, and it replaced the earlier NIH-wide data sharing policy. I won't go into much detail here, but I did want to indicate some basic aspects of the scope of this policy. The policy indicates that scientific data should be managed and shared, and scientific data being defined in the policy as recorded factual material of sufficient quality to validate and replicate research findings. And the policy indicates that this may include unpublished key findings. We have since released a frequently asked question about if this applies to particular circumstances of particular kinds of data, and we did indicate that qualitative data may be considered scientific data, as well as data produced using fundamental basic science techniques like Western blots, for instance. Policy does indicate that some things are not considered scientific data, including lab notebooks, preliminary analyses, and physical objects, things like biospecimens, for instance. The policy is operationalized by applying to research projects, research centers, some career development awards, so some Ks, and SBIR STTRs. I will note, if you're interested in SBIR STTR, there's considerable additional considerations in how this policy applies, so please see our frequently asked questions for more information there. The policy does not apply if the activity is not research. So for instance, training grants, Ts, and fellowships, Fs, are things that are focused on education predominantly, even though they may generate scientific data, and the policy does not apply to them because they are predominantly educational. And it also does not apply to projects not generating scientific data, including construction, awards, conference grants, and resources as well. Alongside the policy, we also released an allowable costs supplemental information document that provides some guidance on 3 different categories of what kinds of costs may be considered data management and sharing costs. And the first category is any costs related to curating data and developing supplemental documentation. So for instance, in developing metadata, that would be considered under this category. Or if developing or sharing data and putting it in a way that is according to accepted community standards, that's a way that that's something that would be considered under this category. The second allowable cost category would be in terms of preserving and sharing data through repositories. So some repositories do have fees to deposit the data, and that would be an allowable cost. And the third category being local data management considerations. So if there's a specialized, unique infrastructure that's necessary for managing data prior to it being shared, that's something that would be under this category. The allowable cost supplemental information does also indicate some things that are not considered data sharing costs, even though they may be allowable elsewhere in the budget. So those are things that are like infrastructure costs that should be that are typically in indirect costs, or things like costs associated with routine conduct of research. So for instance, if there's a project that involves accessing data and there's a cost to that, that would not be considered a data sharing cost, but that may be allowable in another part of the budget. Going forward, I will say that NIH is really interested in learning more about what constitutes a reasonable cost and for various different kinds of data management and sharing activities. And that's one main reason that we are monitoring the landscape of data management and sharing costs and budgets. In an initial evaluation of data management and sharing costs from 2023, we did see a considerable variation in the kinds of costs that are being requested as data management and sharing costs, even within categories of similar categories of projects. So projects that were of a similar budget, or projects that are similar in terms of activities, for instance, clinical trials. So this really underscores the importance of us focusing on the implementation in terms of data management and sharing budgeting going forward. And so thank you so much for focusing this webinar on this really important topic as well. And with that, I would like to thank you all and note that there are a number of resources that we've developed alongside this policy that I'll refer to here on the sharing.nih.gov website. And if there are any additional questions, please follow up via some of these inboxes. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Ellen. And Ellen, if you want, you could feel free to copy those emails into the chat. that you had on that last slide if you want.
Sure.
Thank you very much.
Thank
If you have questions for Ellen, we're going to be doing a Q&A at the end. And I'm keeping track of the questions that you're putting into chat now. I see your Scout. We'll make sure that we get that answered or try to answer it. Okay, so the next person up is Kristen. And Kristen will be talking about how the DMS policy impacts grant policy compliance with NIH and related allowable costs. I hope I said that right.
Great. Okay, so thank you, Ellen, for kind of giving that great overview of the policy and what that looks like. So I'm not going to rehash kind of the policy overview. I am going to talk a bit about the ways that NIH collects data on data management and sharing, mainly through the DMS template and the RPPR. And I'm also going to touch on what we're doing in terms of budget information to help kind of clarify that for the community and support you all. So to start off, I'm going to talk a bit about the data management and sharing template. So initially, when the policy rolled out in 2023, OER, the Office of Extramural Research here at NIH, developed an optional DMS plan format page that essentially aligns with the 6 recommended elements of a DMS plan, just kind of laying them out in order. What we saw as that format page went out and folks started preparing applications is that many ICs were feeling a need to develop their own IC-specific templates. And so that kind of raised some alarm bells because, you know, the concern was raised that, oh no, we're going to have 24 different templates across all of the NIH institutes and centers. And that's going to be really challenging, not only for applicants to navigate, but for NIH when it comes time to monitor compliance because all of the forms will be different. So we took a step back. And Michelle Bowles, the director of Opera, who unfortunately she's ill today and wasn't able to join us, but she had the great idea of working with the Federal Demonstration Partnership to conduct a pilot with the goal of creating a single NIH template for DMS plans that both gets NIH the information that we need, but is also simple and straightforward for our applicants and recipients. And so this pilot included testing of 2 DMS plan templates, Alpha and Bravo. We collected feedback from both the applicant community and our NIH program officials who are receiving and reviewing DMS plans regularly. And so we took that feedback, and where we stand right now is we've developed a new DMS plan template that we're currently calling Charlie, which we're finalizing with the hope of rolling out as the new OER format page for data management and sharing plans. So I'm going to quickly walk through some of the feedback that we got both from our program officials and from the community and what the changes that we made to the template kind of in response to that feedback. So first off, some PO observations on the format. If you've seen the OER format page, it's kind of just a lot of free text, you know, write out in paragraphs what you're doing. So one of the things that was suggested from the get-go was using table formats. Currently, when folks are filling out a plan, they're often providing the same information in different places or addressing the same issues in different places, but providing information that doesn't always sync up. So we're going to try to collect information once in one spot in the templates. And then there was also some confusion related to genomic data sharing and whether that applied. So that was another piece of the template that we needed to consider. In terms of the content of the data management and sharing plans, program officials were basically finding that there wasn't enough detail in what was being provided. It wasn't clear where all of the data was coming from, what formats were being shared. Folks often weren't addressing all types of research data that they were generating in their plan. They might miss 1 or 2 of the data types. And then folks weren't clearly addressing the timing of when data would be shared. It wasn't easy to see if applicants kind of were prepared to comply with the timelines laid out in the policies. Many applicants were not naming a repository or were simply saying, you know, I'll share my data by publication or I'll share it at conferences. And that's really not typically an acceptable format of sharing. And then when applicants said they were not going to share data, again, they were failing to provide enough justification and detail as to what that would look like and why. And so from our pilot participants, we got kind of the flip side of that same data, right? So where NIH, we weren't seeing enough detail, the pilot participants were saying, we need more guidance on what level of detail you want. What specific things are you looking for? How can we structure that to create a plan that is compliant from the get-go and doesn't require a lot of back and forth to get to an approved plan? Pilot participants also wanted a template that works equally well for human subjects research as well as other data types. With the goal of having a template for all of NIH, we really need to make sure that it covers all the different types of data that NIH research supports. And then some feedback we got also on the plans is that the plans seem long as currently laid out and request redundant information. So that was another area that we wanted to address in our updated template. So how did we use that feedback? So hopefully you all will be seeing this new format page in the next couple of months. This slide goes over some of the changes that we've made to that original OER format. So utilizing tables wherever possible, having a line for every data type, that's being collected in that project with all of the elements right there so that you can fill them in. Where possible, we're trying to utilize drop-down menus. And in those drop-down menus, we're using established lists and terms as much as possible. So the example that's here on this slide, one of the things that needs to be provided is the data type. And so we have added a drop-down there, and the categories in that drop-down are the BMIC subject areas, so that we'll be getting consistent information on data types from everyone that's preparing a DMS plan. We've also made some adjustments to the way we're asking questions surrounding limitations related to consent and privacy, and regarding the wording to provide guidance on when information is expected. So for example, instead of simply asking when will the data be shared, we try to provide some more detailed information about, the policy expects the data be provided on this timeline. Please explain how you're going to meet that timeline, versus just leaving it open-ended and allowing folks to provide information that may not be compliant with the policy. So that's what we're doing in terms of collecting information on the front end with the DMS plans. And hopefully this new template is going to be a much better format to get us more structured information and be easier for applicants to use and understand. So post-award, so we have the plan, it's approved, and now it's time to report out on what you said you were going to do. So we've used the same feedback that we got as we developed those templates to basically inform how we're going to be requesting information in the RPPR. So you may have seen that we announced that we'll be having RPPR questions going out at the beginning of October that will prompt users to provide information on their DMS plan, highlight any changes, and upload new plans if they need to request approval for a new plan in the RPPR. And so one change that we've immediately implemented is that this will be displayed in your RPPR as a table. As of right now, it doesn't map exactly to the template that we've been working on simply because that template isn't finalized. But long-term, the goal will be to have, our final NIH template, and it will map directly to what you're providing in the RPPR. So each line on the table in your plan will become a line on your RPPR where you're providing the updates. So we're really trying to streamline it from beginning to end so that it's easier for the applicant and the recipient. And then it's much easier for our NIH program officials to see what you said you were going to do and what you did and make sure that that compliance piece is there. And then lastly, I'm going to touch a bit on what we're doing related to DMS costs. I know Ellen talked about this a little bit. This is definitely an area that we're still doing a lot of work in. As part of the reviews that our ICPOs were doing of DMS plans in terms of content, they were also looking at budget justification information. So this is just kind of a quick overview of the observations of what we've seen. The DMS information is often missing from budget justifications. Folks are requesting $0 or very low dollar amounts for many applications, even when they have a detailed plan. The budget justifications that we are seeing often are not tied explicitly to the activities that are listed in the DMS plan. So if you're saying you have a person whose job is going to be to clean and manage the data and get it ready to go into the repository, we would expect to see information in the budget justification in terms of providing support for that individual. There's also often a disconnect between the staff that are described in the plan and the staff that budget information is being requested for. And then we often see significant costs for data management when there's little or no sharing happening. So those are really just some initial IC observations. And one of the things that we're going to be continuing to focus on in the DMS pilot as it moves forward is costing and those costing questions. So we're really hoping to collect more information about what costs institutions are seeing, whether they're planning to treat them as direct or if there are things that are going to be captured as indirect. We really want to understand the landscape of costs related to data management and sharing so that we can help establish some common cost principles, identify common costs that are required and necessary, and create more guidance in terms of what's reasonable and how costs should be requested in DMS budgets. The pilot will be creating a working group to brainstorm ways that we can catalog these activities and costs with the ultimate goal of creating a cost or effort calculator that can be used to help develop applications. On the NIH side, we're also hoping to develop a lot of additional guidance on what is considered reasonable costs for DMS, what types of things folks may see that are allowable, and all of that. So that's kind of the next phase of the pilot that we're working on. We're hoping to focus on that a lot over the next year and hopefully get a lot more information and guidance out to you all. And so with that, I know we're taking questions at the end, so I'll go ahead and pass it to the next.
Oh, great. Thank you so much, Kristen. That was great. And for jumping in at the last minute, that was amazing. Okay, so I'm going to pass it on now to John, who is from Stanford University, and he'll be talking to us a bit about in the trenches with the PIs and his experience with that. So, John, can you turn on your video or do I need to do that?
I think you need to do that because you turned it off.
Oh, I was wondering why you all weren't showing up. Apologies for previous speakers. Okay, sorry.
Hi. Hi there, everyone. So my name is John Borghi. I am the Data Management Program Manager here at Stanford School of Medicine. I will be talking about kind of on-the-ground support for all of this. Before I move forward, I just want to explain briefly the cover illustration here. So this is an example of data reuse that hits very close to home for me personally. This is a screenshot from a manuscript that was put out about 200 years ago by a very distant relative of mine, but then it was lost to history, supposedly. My archivist friends will not appreciate that framing of it, but when it was donated to the archive of Cornell University, it was promptly mislabeled and lost to history. And this was rediscovered a couple of years ago and reintroduced to my family about 6 months ago by yours truly as this example of a woman in science who is related to all of us, who painted these beautiful pictures of the flora and fauna of Cuba. Anyway, so as I mentioned, I work for the School of Medicine here at Stanford, and we have a lot of and have had a lot of very strong motivations to facilitate effective data management and more recently data sharing, right? Our data collection and retention policy that's been on the books here at Stanford at least since the 90s in its current iteration has in it, if you look, a implication that researchers should be managing their data well. They should be keeping it systematically organized and communicating that organizational scheme to their research group members. And to me, that sounds like effective data management. We, of course, here in the School of Medicine, receive a lot of funding from the National Institutes of Health. And so the NIH data management and sharing policy is something that we were very active in trying to understand and respond to before it was implemented and now support as it is implemented. Stanford is also a place where data management practices and the sort of broader conversation about data management is very, very active. So we are home to the Center for Expanded Data Annotation and Retrieval, CEDAR, which is a center that builds tools to facilitate good metadata on shared data sets. And the brain imaging data structure, which for me is something that's very close to home because I used to be a neuroscientist, was not solely developed here, but definitely evolved out of a lot of work that happens here. And so before the policy came out, we did quite a bit of work trying to raise researcher awareness about it. I spoke at many a Zoom meeting and many a large sort of faculty meeting. We put out lots of announcements and information about how folks could prepare for the policy. We built a guidance page, a landing page for folks who had questions about the policy that were local. That page is still up. And once the policy went into effect early last year, we started what we are calling the Stanford DMP service, which is a collaboration between the research office where I'm situated and the libraries at Stanford, where I used to be situated and where many of my colleagues still work, to provide a single point of entry for assistance with things like the following. Understanding data management and sharing related requirements. We're here talking about the NIH policy, but there are more policies and additional policies that exist. We also have policies from all kinds of other funders, either now that exist or will be in the future. The service also provides support for writing and revising data management and sharing plans. I will reassure my NIH colleagues here that we are never writing plans on folks' behalf. We are giving feedback to them on plans that they themselves are writing. And then we also work to help folks implement good data management practices effectively. So this is mostly training and outreach. So this is a service that we provide free of charge and is open to anyone at Stanford. It's not dissimilar from other services at other universities or data librarians or other sort of domain experts in these fields are helping researchers write and revise data management and sharing plans. But I wanted to speak a little bit more to this. This service has three kind of distinct phases to it. So the first phase is to help with plan development. And at this time, investigators here at Stanford can make use of a wide variety of tools and resources that we make available to them. We have the online guide that I mentioned before. I teach regular one-off workshops. These are primarily targeted towards Stanford Medicine, School of Medicine researchers, but they're actually open and free to anyone. So if you want to click through this link and sign up for one, you can. We also have created an annotated data management and sharing plan template. So taking the template that the NIH has provided about how to format a DMSP and adding our own annotations about basically what certain terms mean, how to address certain things that I'll get into. We also make extensive use of DMP tool. When an investigator is writing their plan, they can schedule a one-on-one consultation with us. They can do that either through email or through a form or through DMP tool. Many times nowadays, they just email us directly. The feedback that we give them, we have attempted to standardize, or at least attempted to keep standard through a rubric that we have developed internally. We are very careful to communicate to our investigators that this is our own rubric. It does not represent, how NIH will be judging plans and assessing plans, but it's something that we use to kind of standardize the feedback that we are giving. We also will give some standardized language to them after these consultations. It's not something that we just make available to anyone, but after talking to researchers, sometimes we will give them like a standard set of language that they can adapt to describe something like our institutional repository. I'll show an example of that. And then once the plan is submitted and that we don't touch the plans after we give feedback on them, we just maintain copies of them to track recurring issues, focus on issues that come up in our guidance, train staff members. We do flag plans that we think are exemplary, so we can follow up with the researchers and see kind of how that process went for them. But at this time, we're not sharing those with anybody. So just as an example, or just for demonstration purposes, and there's links, this is freely available if you'd like to use it for whatever purpose. This is just an example from our DMSP rubric that we come up with. As you can see here, it's mostly just very descriptive. In the absence of other guidance, we give this to researchers and say, like, this is how we as an internal service are looking at your plans. Here's how we think that they can be improved. But of course, it is program staff that will be making the final determination. When it comes to providing standardized language, this is what we mean. So here at Stanford, we have lots of repository options that are available for our investigators. And they may or may not know some of the details about these resources that we think are important to address in a data management and sharing plan. So the Stanford Digital Repository is our institutional repository option. We also have Dryad, the data repository, available for our researchers through a subscription through our medical library. And so we provide some sort of text that folks can adapt for their purposes. Typically, I really advise against copying and pasting this boilerplate text. It actually doesn't really fit with the format of the data management and sharing plan. It just provides some details that I think are important for folks to know and address. So I know there's at least a couple of data librarian kind of folks and people who do this kind of work on the call. And so you probably have heard these questions, but anecdotally, I just wanted to address some of the common questions that we get and how we address them. So the very first question we get all the time is, how do I define my data? Like that, the first element one, what is your data? How will it be, or what data will be preserved and shared? We get a lot of different responses to them, either sort of underdefined data, or just people don't really have an understanding of what kind of people are asking for here. So we've incorporated into our guidance, into our rubrics, into all kinds of worksheets and things, a workflow and processed version, a workflow or process-based perspective on what research data is. I don't think I have it in this deck, but I have a whole table that I give to people about, like, here's how you kind of think about the details of your data, and I can maybe send that along. The other big question that we get is, what is a data standard? I don't want to speak for anyone on this call here, but I personally receive a lot of questions or a lot of comments like, I don't actually know what this means, or they just list file formats, which is very understandable. As someone who came to this work as a researcher beforehand, I don't think I had a great understanding of what data standards were, even though there are some for the field I was working in. So my typical response emphasizes things like interoperability. This is where we get into conversations about standardized practices, things of that nature. The other comment, and I think this has come up in previous conversations that comes up a lot, is how do I share? Even just locally, as I said, investigators have access to multiple generalist data repositories. We have our institutional repository. We also have subscriptions to Dryad and to Vivli most recently, plus the huge ecosystem of specialized repositories and other mechanisms for sharing data that need to be controlled. So things like DUAs and stuff like that. Something that I work a lot on is trying to create guidance for this. We have a flow diagram that I've linked to in the slides for choosing a repository. This is in every talk I ever give to local researchers. And I'm trying to work on and streamline processes for things like data use agreements and things like that. The other big question, and this is the question of the day that I get, is how do I budget? This comes from our investigators themselves, but it also comes from our grant office, other stakeholders on campus who want to know how much money we should be thinking about here. This is not a direct quote from anybody in particular, but sometimes the question is something to the effect of, well, do I budget $0 because the repositories that I'm going to be using are free through the institution, or do I budget some huge number of dollars because I'm not sure how much all this costs, right? And this is also a local conversation that we have ongoing because of issues like our local storage options, things like Box and Google Drive that are coming under constraints, and people are concerned about how they're going to pay for that kind of thing. And we're having this whole conversation about direct costs versus indirect costs. And there's also a lot of uncertainty about how to budget for personnel. And this is probably not news for folks on this call, but there's a lot of uncertainty about like, well, do I budget X amount of percentage time for a postdoc or a grad student or a lab manager or somebody to handle all of this? So I'm going to skip through this, but typically a conversation or a consultation about data sharing involves me asking questions like this. What can you do with the data that you have? What do you need to do? And what do you want to do? And I'm always encouraging, openness to the degree that that's possible, while of course, respecting things like participant privacy and things of that nature. I do just want to give a caveat to everything that I said, is that my emphasis on supporting data management and sharing plans is, partially because we obviously want to be compliant with all of this and put our researchers in a position where they are writing plans that are excellent, but also I view it as part of a much broader support for data management in general, right? So whenever I talk about this, I talk about like your data management and sharing plan is part of your grant application. You don't typically put like every step you do for a Western blot in that grant application, but you have that protocol documented somewhere. So you should also have your data management practices well thought out, considered, and documented somewhere. My goal is really in supporting the quality and usability of research data over time. And so we create things like lab manual templates, data monitoring forms, which are these work as a worksheet that people can document their data management standards and then check them off to make sure that they are being implemented properly. We are also trying to give folks who are maybe newer to this conversation about managing and sharing data a starting point to get started in their research group. So good enough practices. This is not my framing alone, but we certainly try to give people some advice on getting started, even if they're a student in a setting where there's maybe no defined data management practices, or they're a lab head or somebody who's trying to define good data management in their own settings. And then we have these principles of data management that we try to weave in and out. And I mostly am using this slide as another opportunity to show some of this botanical illustration. But yeah, so that's a whirlwind tour of supporting data management. And I want to thank everyone for their attention and their input. And I think we're moving on to questions now.
Yes. I thank you so much, John. I really appreciate you being here, and that was very helpful. We have I have to apologize because I did not check the box that said Q&A for setting this up, because there are some amazing questions here. Okay, so I'm going to just scroll on up to the first few, I think, and I think what we'll do too is I'll have a copy of this chat and I can send maybe to all of you for the ones that we might not get to, and maybe you could help answer them and I could send them to everybody. Would that be okay? Afterwards, because there's a lot. Okay, so I'm way back up at the beginning, and it says, I've been running, Deb McCaffrey, I've been running. Do you want to unmute, Deb, and ask your question, or I can read it? It's up to you.
Sure, that's fine. So this is, I'm more on the IT infrastructure side of all this. A problem we've been running into is, for data sets that can't go into a typical repository, and it's usually because the data is too large, you have to find an alternative. And research technology teams are trying to provide storage for this, like having a tape archive that can just take like any data. But the university finance offices, which determines how you can recharge for any of that, they're pretty much, you have to do some type of monthly or yearly cost. No like one-time upfront costs. None. So that's completely opposite of how funding through grants is allowed. So how can we handle this conflict?
Who wants to take that one on? Kristen or Ellen?
So, I mean, I think you can definitely pay. I'd be curious to know a little bit more about why they're focused on the monthly charge versus a one-time fee, because like deposit fees for data are definitely allowable. I'm wondering if it's maybe because you're paying for, you know, time that's going well beyond the project period, which can get a little bit dicey. I don't necessarily have an answer for you other than to say that we've heard similar feedback from other folks in terms of handling those fees. And that is something that we're planning on looking at as part of the budget look that we're doing with the FDP pilot related to costs. So I can't help you right this minute, but it's definitely on our radar to get better guidance out about those types of costs.
It must be some sort of like standard practice in finance, because I've heard it from multiple institutions. So
yeah, typically you're not allowed to pay up front for something that's going to happen well beyond the period of performance of your grant, right? So normally you can't pay for 10 years of something for a grant that's 3 years long. And so, yeah, we've definitely heard that. And that's an area that we're working on to try to clarify how those costs need to work and be charged to awards.
I'll just add on to that, that I think, you know, this brings up a larger issue with regard to data sharing infrastructure. And that's also a big focus at NIH is, you know, we support a lot of repositories in addition to having this policy. And Lena brings up a great point about large images being a particular data type that's often problematic. You know, these are areas that we're still working on in terms of getting repository infrastructure up to the point where it can kind of complement this policy and support it. And you know, that's important why we're kind of in a learn as we go phase with some of this.
Okay, thank you. Sun Young, this question looks like it got answered. Or does this answer your question? The next one, when will the FDP NIH phase 2 kick off?
Yes,
people are more than welcome to put their cameras on too if you want.
Right. I think Kristen, to answer the question, you know, one of them. So I'm very interested in the cost principle, because it's a really big deal. I mean, as you know, a lot of PIs don't put anything in because they don't want any money taken away from the research fund. And the other irony part is, you know, the budget is reviewed by peer reviewers, but DMSP is not in most cases, although some FOA specifically requires DMSP being reviewed, but that's very rare. So you're supposed to make a justification based on DMSP, but you know, the peer reviewers don't know what they put in. So a lot of times there's a discrepancy. They request a budget for, you know, for example, local data storage platform, but they don't even mention in the DMSP. So how do we check those things? And as you mentioned, sometimes there's a cost past the award period. So those are all the things we should consider during phase 2. And you know, there's labor cost is the major cost most PIs put in. Like you know, oh, I'm going to spend this much time, or myself or data manager curating or preparing documents. So that's easy. Sometimes they do 5% or they put the dollar amount, but other stuff is really hard to pin down. And how we're going to handle it when they need to maintain the data past the award period. those all kinds of things. And I wish there's a template we can put in. NDA has a template, but it's only for labor costs, right? So I'm trying to build template I can use for, you know, our PIs, for example. There's a labor cost, but there's a local data storage consideration they can put in as a DMS, you know, DMS budget. So I put together a list of all the possible things they can use and the cost, which they change every year anyway. And then, you know, sometimes they will do they put in a budget, but other times it's like a monthly charge kind of thing, which would be hard to track. But at least if put something together as a template, then we can start there. And I'm sure some institutions might have that. So I'm looking forward to participating. The phase 1 was hard to participate because of a specific quarterly reporting requirement that puts a huge burden on the, you know, our OSRS, and they just put their hands out, we're not doing it. So we ended up participating indirectly. So I don't know how, you know, NIH or FDP is going to roll out this phase 2, whether they roll out as a part of the FDP or like they opened up the Alpha and Bravo through Extramural Nexus news. So opening up to everybody who would like to join, that'll be more ideal so we can get more broad perspective. So I'm really looking forward to getting more details about how phase 2 is going to roll out and what information you're going to collect, and template, for example, with a cost principle template. That'd be really awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely our goal to try to create some tools and calculators that can be more useful for folks. You'll probably, I know we're not slated to do a DMS session at the FDP meeting next week. So I'd expect to hear more about this phase of the pilot at the January meeting, most likely.
Great. And I actually, Washu got invited to this roundtable discussion about Charlie. So that's another thing. And there was only like a handful of institutions. So I assume you're going to have a multiple. Sorry about that. My phone just rang at the wrong time. Anyway, so, you know, I'm sure you're going to gather and then roll out, but I have a concern about this subject area, for example. And Bravo template has a lot more, you know, different subject type compared to BMIC. So if you're going with the BMIC, I don't think many people will find the relevant data type. So, you know, I just don't know how you're going to handle all the different feedback and then kind of converge into Charlie template. And I think NCI released a template that looks a lot like a Charlie template, but many things are captured in the table. So I like the idea of having drop-down menus so people don't have to type up. And if you can somehow, standard is a major issue. A lot of people don't know how to find it. But if you can actually, you know, give them some examples based on the data type, that'd be great. I'm sorry about that. You know, the fairsharing.org. Yeah.
Yeah. It's all okay. So we have 3 minutes left and not enough time for all these questions to answer. So I would like to know, if I categorize these, send an email off, can you all help us answer them? And I'm happy to send the answers that we get off to everybody here. I think we're running out of time. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. There's a lot of questions. I'll track the questions and what's already been answered. I'll send it off to the presenters and we'll get you answers as best we can. So I'm glad there's so many questions. We could do a part 2 of this thing, looks like, but it's clearly a topic that's needed. And we really appreciate all of you being here and helping with this. Thank you so much. And I think that's it.